The sound of screaming tore through the quiet neighborhood, shattering the illusion of safety behind pristine fences and manicured lawns. A young boy lay crying beneath the splintered wreckage of his treehouse, his arm twisted painfully, blood staining the grass beneath him. Standing nearby, clutching a saw with trembling hands, was the HOA president, an entitled woman known for her ruthless enforcement of community rules. But this time, her obsession had gone too far. What began as petty harassment had escalated into violence, and the law was about to catch up. Neighbors stood frozen, unsure if they had just witnessed an accident or a deliberate act of cruelty. The neighborhood was the kind of place people dreamed about moving in. Two gleaming driveways, flower beds trimmed with precision, and a strict HOA board that claimed to keep everything perfect. But beneath the polished exterior, it was a place where power was often abused, especially by one woman who relished the title of HOA president, known for nitpicking children's toys left in yards, writing up families for unauthorized decorations, and scolding anyone who didn't fit her idea of suburban order. She had become both feared and despised. In this same neighborhood lived a hard-working family whose young son, Ethan, had spent weeks building his treehouse with his father. For Ethan, it wasn't just wood and nails, it was his kingdom, a sanctuary where imagination came alive. The family had taken every precaution, placing it safely in their own backyard, secured and harmless. Yet, from the moment it went up, the HOA president seethed with anger. She claimed it was an eyesore, a hazard, and even accused Ethan's family of lowering property values. But what truly fueled her rage was unspoken, though neighbors recognized it instantly. Ethan's family didn't look like most of the others in the neighborhood. They were outsiders in a community that prized uniformity, and their joy seemed to offend her more than any structure ever could. The tension grew with each passing day. Letters were sent. Threats were made. The boys' treehouse became a battleground, not of wood and nails, but of prejudice and entitlement. No one expected it would end in violence until the day the HOA president decided to take matters into her own hands. Saw in hand, with Ethan still inside, the letters escalated into daily confrontations. Ethan's parents found notes taped to their door, threatening fines for unauthorized structures and warnings of legal action. Neighbors saw the HOA president pacing near their yard, glaring at the treehouse as if it were a personal insult. Each week, she grew bolder, her voice sharper, her demands more unreasonable. Ethan, just 9 years old, tried to ignore the tension. To him, the treehouse was a fortress of imagination. He decorated it with drawings, strung up a few lights, and invited friends to play. But the joy of childhood was constantly shadowed by the watchful eyes of someone who couldn't stand to see him happy. His parents reassured him that they were handling it, that adults would solve adult problems. But prejudice rarely listens to reason. One hot afternoon, the confrontation reached its breaking point. The HOA president stormed across the yard with a saw clutched tightly in her hand. She didn't announce her presence, didn't wait for anyone to intervene. Ethan was inside the treehouse, humming to himself as he drew, unaware of the storm brewing below. The sharp sound of metal biting into wood shattered the calm. The boy froze, peeking out to see the woman sawing through the very beams that held up his sanctuary. Panic surged. He cried out for help, but the sound of the saw and his own fear drowned everything else. Neighbors emerged, some in shock, others paralyzed by disbelief. The structure groaned under its own weight, splinters falling like rain. Ethan scrambled, but he was too slow. The treehouse tilted violently, and in seconds it collapsed. Wood-cracked nails tore loose, and the child fell with it, his small body slamming against the ground. A piercing scream ripped through the neighborhood as blood stained the grass. Gasps erupted. Phones came out, but no one moved fast enough to stop it. The HOA president dropped the saw, her face pale yet defiant, muttering about teaching a lesson as if her actions could ever be justified. Ethan writhed on the ground, his arm twisted unnaturally, his cries echoing through the shocked silence. By the time his parents rushed out, their world had already changed forever. The sight of their son lying broken beneath the wreckage was every parent's nightmare. Neighbors finally found their voices, shouting at the woman, calling 911, and realizing too late that silence had enabled this cruelty. What had started as petty harassment had become something much darker, a crime that could no longer be ignored. The entitled rage of one woman had crossed the line into violence, and the whole neighborhood was about to witness the consequences. The sound of sirens shattered the stunned silence. Red and blue lights cut across the neighborhood, flashing against manicured lawns and pristine white fences. Deputies poured out of their vehicles, rushing toward the small crowd that had gathered around Ethan. His mother knelt beside him, tears streaking her face as she tried to comfort her son, while his father hovered protectively, fury and helplessness mixing in his eyes. The HOA president stood a few feet away, arms folded tightly, her face defiant. She tried to insist she was enforcing the rules, pointing at the wreckage of the treehouse, as though that could excuse the sight of a child lying injured in the grass. But the deputies weren't swayed by her arrogance. Neighbors stepped forward, their voices overlapping some, admitting they had seen her sawing through the beams. Others confessing they had been too afraid to intervene until now. The evidence was undeniable. The saw still lay on the ground, splintered wood and nails scattered everywhere, and Ethan's broken arm a living testament to the consequences of her actions. Deputies quickly separated her from the crowd, their questions sharp and direct. She sputtered excuses. A collective murmur rippled through the onlookers. Some gasped, others nodded in grim approval. The very woman who had lorded power over the neighborhood for years now stood shackled, her entitlement stripped bare for all to see. Ethan was lifted carefully onto a stretcher, his cries soft but steady, his small hand clinging desperately to his mother's, as paramedics carried him to the ambulance. The weight of what had unfolded settled over the street like a storm cloud. This was no longer just a neighborhood dispute. It was a crime one the law would no longer overlook. For the first time, the HOA president's authority had consequences, and the neighborhood watched, confronted by the truth of what unchecked prejudice and entitlement could destroy. The ambulance pulled away, its siren fading into the night, leaving behind a silence heavier than the chaos that came before it. Neighbors stood clustered in small groups, their faces pale with shock. The HOA president, once untouchable in her authority, was now seated in the back of a deputy's cruiser, her wrists bound, her expression hollow. The very rules she had once used as a weapon had now become evidence of her downfall. Ethan's parents followed the ambulance, their lives forever changed by the sight of their child broken beneath the wreckage of something that should have been a symbol of joy. The image of him lying in the grass, crying out in pain, would never leave them. Yet amid the devastation, there was also clarity. Silence had allowed the harassment to grow unchecked. Neighbors admitted they had seen the signs, her threats, her obsessions, her prejudice, but had stayed quiet, afraid of rocking the boat. Now they had to face the reality that their silence had nearly cost a child his life. Some organized to remove her from her HOA position permanently. Others demanded broader changes to prevent abuses of power from happening again. Ethan, though injured, began his recovery surrounded by love and support. His treehouse was gone, but his spirit was not. In fact, his story became a rallying point, a reminder that no rulebook or title could ever justify cruelty. For viewers, one question remains: how many times do we look away until it's too late? When will communities stop letting power, prejudice, and entitlement hide behind the mask of rules? Because sometimes the greatest danger isn't in breaking the rules, it's in the people who twist them to hurt others.